My name is Ruth, and I am 69 years old. As a retired hospice volunteer coordinator, I dedicated my entire career to compassionate end-of-life care, honoring dignity, and respecting patient autonomy above all else. I meticulously planned for my own secure retirement, carefully documenting my medical wishes and financial affairs, believing my children, Mark and Lisa, would honor them when the time came. I supported them through every challenge, nurtured them through every crisis, always prioritizing their well-being over my own, expecting nothing more than mutual respect and understanding in return. Then diagnosed with aggressive scleroderma, my carefully ordered world collapsed as my children converged on my life like vultures. Mark immediately seized control, scheduling invasive procedures without my consent while dismissing my questions with cruel impatience. Lisa paraded unproven, expensive alternative healers through my home, costing $5,000 per week while demanding I submit to their questionable treatments. "You're losing your mind," Mark raged when I dared to question his decisions. "You're too old to know what's best for yourself," Lisa cried when I resisted her costly remedies. My grandchildren, coached by their parents, began calling me Grandma who's confused. My autonomy, my dignity, my entire career's principles all stripped away by the people I loved most. I felt utterly alone, trapped in my own life, profoundly shamed by my own family. Yet as Mark's wife, Brenda, began probing my finances with predatory interest, a hospice coordinator's fierce drive for patient rights ignited a cold fury deep within my chest. What Mark, Lisa, Brenda, and the unethical Dr. Thompson didn't know was my carefully guarded, secret, meticulous professional notes documenting family interventions in medical crises, my personal journal detailing their misguided attempts to control my care, and crucial observations of their specific efforts to dismiss my clearly stated wishes. My trusted doctor supported my autonomy completely. My hospice network of colleagues waited in the wings, ready to defend patient rights. This time, their insidious plot wouldn't just unravel, it would expose their shocking lack of empathy, reclaim my body and my choices, and restore my dignity, proving that patient autonomy triumphs over family control, no matter how it's disguised as love. The moment I received my scleroderma diagnosis, I knew my life was about to change forever. What I didn't expect was how quickly my own children would transform from loving family members into controlling strangers who seemed to view my illness as an opportunity to seize power over every aspect of my existence. I was still processing the diagnosis in my hospital bed, trying to understand what this autoimmune disease would mean for my future, when Mark burst into my room with the aggressive energy of a man on a mission. Behind him came Lisa, tears streaming down her face, followed by Mark's wife, Brenda, who immediately began scrutinizing my medical charts as if she had every right to access my private information. "Mom, we need to talk," Mark announced, without any preamble or consideration for my emotional state. His voice was firm and utterly patronizing, the tone he might use with a confused child rather than the accomplished woman who had raised him. "You're sick and you don't understand the gravity of this situation. I'm taking charge of your medical care from this point forward." Before I could even respond, he launched into a detailed explanation of the invasive procedures he had already scheduled with specialists I had never met, dismissing my questions with impatient waves of his hand. "You will follow the doctors I have chosen, no questions asked," he declared with the authority of someone who had never spent a day caring for patients or understanding their rights. "Your life depends on it, and you're losing your mind if you think you can make these decisions in your current state." The casual way he dismissed my mental capacity, the complete disregard for my decades of experience in healthcare, and the assumption that my diagnosis had somehow rendered me incompetent was breathtaking in its cruelty. This was my son, the child I had raised to respect others and value human dignity, treating me like a burden to be managed rather than a person with rights. Lisa's approach was different, but equally devastating. She arrived with Dr. Thompson, a charismatic but clearly unethical alternative healer, who immediately began criticizing conventional medicine while promoting expensive, unproven treatments that would cost $5,000 per week. "Mom, you just need to believe," Lisa insisted through her tears, as if faith alone could cure a complex autoimmune disease. Dr. Thompson has helped so many people when traditional medicine failed them. These treatments are expensive, but what's money compared to your life? The irony was devastating. Here was my daughter, who had never shown any interest in medical science, suddenly becoming an expert in alternative treatments, while dismissing the carefully planned medical directives I had spent years preparing as a healthcare professional. But it was Brenda's behavior that revealed the true nature of their concern for my well-being. While Mark and Lisa performed their respective medical interventions, Brenda was quietly probing my financial accounts, asking pointed questions about my retirement savings, and subtly implying that I was too sick to manage my own money. "Ruth, honey," she said with false sweetness, "you really shouldn't be worrying about financial matters right now. Maybe it would be better if Mark and I handled your accounts while you focus on getting better. We could even look into guardianship options to protect you from making any mistakes." The suggestion of guardianship delivered with such casual cruelty made my blood run cold. These people were discussing stripping me of my legal rights while I lay helpless in a hospital bed, framing their power grab as protection and care. I tried desperately to assert my patient rights and my own understanding of my prognosis, drawing on decades of experience in hospice care to explain my perspective on treatment options and quality of life considerations. "Mark, Lisa, you know I respect patient autonomy above all else." I pleaded, my voice weak, but my mind still sharp. "My advance directives are clear, and my finances are in perfect order. I understand my diagnosis better than you realize. I have the right to make my own choices about my care." But my words fell on deaf ears. They had already decided that my illness had rendered me incompetent, and nothing I said would change their minds. The humiliation deepened when Brenda began spreading rumors to distant relatives and family friends, painting me as a stubborn, confused old woman whose children were heroically trying to save her from her own poor judgment. "Poor Ruth," she would say with practiced sympathy during phone calls I could overhear from my hospital bed. "She's so ill and so stubborn about accepting help. Her children are fighting to get her the care she needs because she's losing her mind. It's such a financial burden, those alternative treatments, but they're willing to do anything to save her." The way she twisted the truth was masterful in its manipulation. She made my resistance to their control sound like dementia, and their expensive, questionable treatments sound like sacrificial love rather than exploitative profiteering. My grandchildren, coached by their parents, began treating me with a mixture of pity and disdain that broke my heart. 10-year-old Ethan, who had once looked up to me with admiration, now spoke to me as if I were a confused stranger. "Grandma, who's confused," he would say when introducing me to his friends, the phrase delivered with the casual cruelty that only children can achieve. "She doesn't understand what's happening to her anymore." The systematic stripping of my dignity continued as Mark and Lisa brought in different specialists for second opinions, each giving conflicting advice that further disoriented me and undermined my confidence in my own judgment. Dr. Thompson, with his chilling smile and predatory demeanor, began pressuring me to sign over significant sums for his personalized treatment plan, while Mark and Brenda stood over me, nodding encouragingly. "Mrs. Ruth," Dr. Thompson would say with oily professionalism, "these treatments require a substantial upfront investment, but I assure you that your family's commitment to your healing is truly inspiring. They're willing to sacrifice everything for your recovery." The way he spoke about my money, as if it were already theirs, the casual assumption that I would comply with whatever they demanded, and the complete dismissal of my right to make informed decisions about my own care, created a humiliation so profound I could barely breathe. My attempts to communicate my wishes were met with dismissive nods or patronizing reassurances that systematically stripped me of any semblance of control over my own life. "Don't worry, Mom," Lisa would say when I tried to discuss my concerns. "We'll take care of everything. You just need to rest and let us handle the difficult decisions." But these weren't difficult decisions for me. They were fundamental violations of everything I had spent my career defending: patient autonomy, informed consent, dignity in illness, respect for advanced directives. All of it was being trampled by people who claimed to love me. As I lay in that hospital bed surrounded by family members who had transformed into strangers, I felt something fundamental break inside me. The children I had raised to be compassionate and respectful had become controlling manipulators who saw my illness as an opportunity to seize power rather than a challenge that required love and support. But beneath the devastating shock and soul-crushing betrayal, something else was stirring. The same fierce advocacy that had made me an excellent hospice coordinator was now focusing on my own case, documenting every violation of my rights, and preparing for a battle I had never imagined I would have to fight. They thought they were dealing with a confused, helpless patient who would submit to their control. They were about to discover that they had awakened something far more dangerous: a woman who had spent her career protecting vulnerable people from exactly this kind of exploitation, and who would not go quietly into the darkness they had planned for her. In the days following my forced hospitalization, Mark and Lisa's campaign to control my medical care escalated with frightening intensity. Through Brenda's calculated guidance, they began pressuring me to undergo highly invasive experimental treatments recommended by Dr. Thompson, treatments that had never been proven effective for scleroderma, but carried significant risks and astronomical costs. "Mom, if you don't fight this disease with everything we have, it means you've given up," Mark declared during one of his increasingly aggressive visits. "These treatments are your only hope, and refusing them is basically choosing to die." The emotional manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. They were framing my reasonable concerns about unproven treatments as a death wish, making me feel guilty for wanting to make informed decisions about my own body. They scheduled procedures without my full informed consent, dismissing my questions about side effects or quality of life impacts as signs of confusion or depression. Dr. Thompson has seen miraculous results with these protocols. Lisa insisted through tears that seemed genuine but felt manipulative. "You have to trust us, Mom. We know what's best for you right now." But it was Brenda's social media campaign that revealed the true scope of their deception. She began posting regular updates about my courageous fight against scleroderma, subtly implying that I was fully cooperating with their chosen treatments, while painting herself and my children as heroic caregivers, making tremendous sacrifices for my recovery. "Ruth is being so brave through this difficult journey," one of her posts read. "Mark and Lisa are dedicating their lives to finding the best possible care for her." It's inspiring to see a family come together like this during such a challenging time. The posts were carefully crafted to generate sympathy and support while isolating me from potential allies who might question their methods. Anyone who saw these updates would assume I was a grateful patient receiving excellent care from devoted family members, making it impossible for me to reach out for help without seeming ungrateful or mentally unstable. But it was what I overheard during a private conversation between Mark and Brenda that revealed the true nature of their concern for my well-being. I was supposed to be sleeping, but their voices carried clearly through the thin walls of my hospital room. "This is costing us a fortune, Brenda," Mark said with obvious frustration. $5,000 a week for those crazy alternative treatments, and Mom's not getting any better. We need to consider other options before we go bankrupt trying to save her. Brenda's response was chilling in its calculated coldness. "Exactly, Mark. If she won't cooperate with the treatments, we'll have to consider end-of-life care options. But we need to protect her assets first. A guardianship petition might be our best approach." The casual way they discussed my fate while I lay helpless in the next room was devastating. Their concern was nothing more than a facade for financial exploitation and controlling my death, just as they had been controlling my life. They weren't trying to save me. They were trying to position themselves to benefit from my illness, while maintaining the appearance of devoted caregivers. As I processed this horrifying revelation, my mind drifted to a secret I had carried for decades, a sacrifice I had made that now seemed like the cruelest irony imaginable. The memory came flooding back with painful clarity, reminding me of just how much I had given up for these people who now saw me as nothing more than a burden to be managed. In 1995, when Mark was just 18 years old, he had suffered a complete psychological breakdown that culminated in a serious suicide attempt. The depression and anxiety that had been building throughout his teenage years finally overwhelmed him, and I found him in our garage with the car running ready to end his young life. The months that followed were the most challenging of my entire career. While maintaining my full-time position as a hospice coordinator, I secretly arranged for Mark to receive intensive psychiatric care, paying over $100,000 from my personal savings for private treatment that would keep his mental health crisis completely confidential. But the real sacrifice came in 2000, when I was offered the director position at the National Hospice Institute, the opportunity I had worked toward my entire career. The position would have involved extensive travel international conferences and the chance to shape hospice care policy on a national level. It was everything I had dreamed of professionally. But Mark, still fragile from his earlier breakdown and terrified of being alone, begged me not to take the position. "Please, Mom," he had said with tears in his eyes. "I can't handle you being away so much. I need you here. I'm not strong enough to be without you." So I turned down the opportunity of a lifetime, sacrificing my professional dreams and personal fulfillment to provide the emotional support my son claimed he needed. I stayed home, continued in my local position, and watched other colleagues advance to the national prominence I had given up. The immense sacrifice of my own career ambitions and personal happiness for Mark's perceived emotional security now seemed like the ultimate betrayal. The son I had protected from public shame, whose recovery I had funded from my own savings, whose emotional needs I had prioritized over my own dreams, he was now using my illness as an excuse to strip away my autonomy and dignity. When I tried to hint at these past sacrifices during one of our increasingly tense conversations, hoping to remind him of the love and support I had always provided, Mark's response was swift and cruel. "Mom, you're always playing the martyr card." he snapped with genuine anger. Your past choices were your own responsibility, not something you can hold over our heads forever. Brenda says you're trying to manipulate us with guilt, and I think she's right. Lisa, who had been present during some of these conversations, added her own twist of the knife. Honestly, Mom, you're getting quite paranoid about our motives. We're genuinely worried about your mental health. These conspiracy theories about us trying to control you are exactly the kind of thinking that proves you need more help than you're willing to admit. The gaslighting was systematic and devastating. Every concern I raised was dismissed as paranoia. Every question I asked was treated as confusion, and every attempt to assert my rights was framed as evidence of my declining mental state. But it was my grandson Ethan's casual cruelty that delivered the final blow to my already shattered heart. During one of their family visits, as they discussed my care, as if I weren't even present, 10-year-old Ethan looked directly at me and said with chilling indifference, "Grandma, you're crazy. Why don't you just die already?" The words hung in the air like poison, and neither Mark nor Lisa corrected him or expressed any shock at his callousness. They had created this environment where my death was openly discussed as a preferable alternative to continued care, and they had programmed an innocent child to express what they were all thinking. The solution that Brenda presented to me the following week was designed to complete my systematic destruction while maintaining their facade of concern. She arrived at my hospital room with official-looking documents and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ruth, we've found the perfect solution for everyone," she announced with false cheerfulness. "There's a lovely assisted living facility called Memory Lane Gardens, about 300 miles from here. It costs $9,000 per month, but it specializes in caring for people with your conditions." The implication was clear. They were planning to warehouse me in an expensive facility, far from any friends or advocates who might question their treatment of me. But the real trap was in the legal documents she wanted me to sign. "If you agreed to the placement and signed this document absolving us of any financial responsibility for your care decisions, we'll take care of all the arrangements," she explained with practiced professionalism. "It's really the best option for everyone involved." The document she presented would strip me of any legal recourse against their exploitation while placing me in an institution where I would be completely isolated and vulnerable. It was a masterpiece of legal manipulation designed to complete their control over my life and assets. As I looked at the faces of my children and daughter-in-law, I realized that the family I had sacrificed everything for had become strangers who viewed my illness as an inconvenience to be managed rather than a challenge to be faced together. Their love had been conditional on my ability to serve their needs, and now that I needed their support, they were discarding me like an unwanted burden. But beneath the profound pain and devastating betrayal, something unbreakable was forming. The same fierce advocacy that had driven my hospice work was now focusing on my own case, and I was beginning to understand that this battle was about more than just my personal situation. It was about the fundamental right of every person to maintain their dignity and autonomy in the face of illness and family pressure. The day they came to remove me from my own home, I knew with absolute certainty that the family I had loved and nurtured for decades was about to complete my systematic destruction. Mark and Brenda arrived like an occupying force, accompanied by staff from Memory Lane Gardens and Dr. Miller, a physician they had obviously paid to provide medical justification for their actions. "Mom, it's time for your transition to a more appropriate care environment," Mark announced with the cold efficiency of someone executing a business plan. "Dr. Miller has determined that this move is medically necessary for your safety and well-being." I stood in my living room surrounded by the memories and mementos of a lifetime spent in service to others, watching these strangers prepare to tear me away from everything that gave my life meaning. The irony was devastating. I, who had spent my career helping families navigate end-of-life decisions with dignity and compassion, was being stripped of those very principles by my own children. Please, I begged my voice, breaking with desperate emotion, don't do this to me. This house is my home, my sanctuary. I'm not a danger to myself or anyone else. My mind is completely clear, and I have the right to make my own decisions about where I live. But they moved forward with mechanical precision, treating my pleas as background noise to be ignored. The facility staff began efficiently packing my precious personal belongings, my patient care notes from decades of hospice work, my personal journals documenting my children's transformation into strangers, and my cherished photographs of the families I had helped through their darkest hours. These items will be placed in storage for safekeeping. One of the staff members explained with practiced indifference, as if my life's work were nothing more than clutter to be cleared away. My invaluable professional documents containing insights about family dynamics during medical crises that had taken me 40 years to accumulate were carelessly tossed into boxes marked miscellaneous papers, and the journals where I had recorded my children's increasingly controlling behavior were treated like worthless diaries rather than the crucial evidence they represented. Lisa, please, I turned desperately to my daughter, who stood frozen in the doorway like a statue. Don't let them do this terrible thing to me. This is my home, my life. You know my mind is clear. Your own son, Michael, is watching you make this choice. Lisa's eyes filled with tears, and for one brief moment, I thought I saw the compassionate daughter I had raised with such love and hope. She whispered something to Mark too quietly for me to hear, but ultimately she stood by in cowardly silence, allowing her mother to be dragged from her own home like a criminal. In that agonizing moment, I understood the complete and irreversible nature of Lisa's betrayal. The daughter I had trusted to preserve my dignity had chosen convenience over courage, their approval over my survival. Her silence was as damning as Mark's active cruelty. As they physically escorted me toward the door, Mark demonstrated the full extent of his callousness with chilling detachment. Just get her settled and comfortable, he instructed the facility staff with the tone he might use to discuss disposing of old furniture. And make sure you take her phone. She won't be needing it where she's going. The casual way he spoke about isolating me from the outside world, cutting off my connections to friends and former colleagues who might question their treatment of me, revealed the calculated nature of their plan. This wasn't about my safety or well-being. It was about silencing me permanently. Brenda, sensing my complete helplessness, couldn't resist delivering one final blow. Honestly, Ruth, she said, with a triumphant smile that revealed her true nature, this house has always been too much responsibility for someone your age. Think of this as a fresh start, completely funded by the assets you can no longer manage properly. But the cruelest cut came from my grandson, Ethan, who had clearly been coached to deliver a public humiliation that would ensure my complete social destruction. In front of the facility staff and neighbors who had gathered to watch the spectacle, he looked at me with practiced disdain and declared, "Grandma, you're crazy anyway. Why don't you just die already and stop being such a burden on everyone?" The public nature of his cruelty was clearly intentional. They wanted witnesses to my supposed mental instability, proof that even my own grandson found me repulsive and dangerous. The shame burned through me like acid, knowing that people who had respected me for decades had just watched my own family declare me worthless. In the sterile, impersonal environment of memory lane gardens, stripped of my personal belongings and isolated from everyone who had ever known the real me, I experienced a darkness deeper than anything I had ever encountered in my hospice work. They had confiscated my phone, monitored my mail, and effectively severed every connection I had to the outside world. It was in that suffocating silence, sitting in a generic room that smelled of disinfectant and despair, that I found myself confronting the most guarded secret of my life, a secret that made their current abandonment almost unbearable in its cosmic irony. After my husband died 15 years ago, I had been approached by Dr. David Richardson, a renowned medical ethicist who had become fascinated by my work in hospice care. He was a brilliant, compassionate man who shared my passion for patient advocacy and end-of-life dignity. Over the months following our initial meeting, we developed a profound intellectual and emotional connection that offered me something I thought I would never have again. David had offered me a life of shared purpose and passionate advocacy. He wanted me to join him in his work, developing international protocols for end-of-life care, traveling to conferences around the world, and building a legacy that would protect vulnerable patients for generations to come. But more than that, he offered me genuine love and companionship with someone who truly understood my work and values. We had begun making plans for a future together, a second marriage built on mutual respect and shared mission. For the first time since my husband's death, I felt genuinely excited about the possibilities ahead of me. David's love was mature and respectful, offering partnership rather than dependence. But Mark, still fragile from his earlier mental health crisis and terrified of any change that might threaten his emotional security, had begged me not to pursue the relationship. "Please, Mom," he had pleaded with tears in his eyes. "I can't handle you being with someone else. I need you to be available for me. I'm not strong enough to share you with anyone." Lisa had joined his plea, claiming that a new relationship would be disrespectful to their father's memory and would confuse the grandchildren. "We need you to be just our mom," she had said, "not someone else's wife. That part of your life is over." So I had chosen their emotional needs over my own happiness, giving up 20 years of potential love, intellectual partnership, and personal fulfillment because my children claimed they couldn't cope with my independence. I had sacrificed my second chance at love to remain eternally available for their needs. David had been heartbroken, but understanding. "Ruth," he had said during our final conversation, "I hope someday you'll realize that your children's inability to see you as a complete person, rather than just their mother, is not love, it's selfishness. You deserve a life of your own." He had been right, and now I was paying the ultimate price for my misguided loyalty. The children I had given up my happiness for had abandoned me in my hour of greatest need, treating me like a burden to be disposed of, rather than a person deserving of love and respect. The cosmic irony was devastating. My decision to sacrifice my own romantic future to remain available for my children's emotional needs had directly enabled their current cruelty. By teaching them that my happiness was less important than their comfort, I had created the very monsters who were now destroying me. As I sat in that sterile room, surrounded by the evidence of my family's systematic betrayal, I felt the weight of complete abandonment and despair. They had stripped away my home, my independence, my dignity, and my voice, all while convincing themselves they were acting in my best interests. But beneath the crushing grief and soul-crushing humiliation, something unbreakable was forming. The same fierce advocacy that had driven my hospice work was now focusing on my own situation, and I was beginning to understand that this battle was about more than just my personal survival. It was about the fundamental right of every person to maintain their dignity and autonomy in the face of illness and family manipulation. They had made one fatal error in their calculated cruelty. They had forgotten that the woman they were trying to destroy had spent 40 years protecting vulnerable people from exactly this kind of exploitation. The hospice coordinator who had documented family abuses and fought for patient rights was still alive within me, and she was about to make her presence known. Inside the sterile walls of Memory Lane Gardens, I discovered that my children's cruelty extended far beyond simple medical control. They had orchestrated a systematic campaign to destroy my very identity as a healthcare professional and reduce me to nothing more than a confused, helpless patient in need of management. The facility staff, clearly influenced by Mark and Brenda's generous donations and Dr. Miller's fabricated reports about my supposed mental decline, subjected me to a relentless regimen of psychological gaslighting that left me questioning my own expertise and professional judgment. "Now, Ruth," the head nurse would say with patronizing sweetness whenever I tried to discuss patient care protocols or ethical considerations, "you're a resident here now, dear, not a patient advocate. Those days are behind you, and it's important to focus on your own recovery rather than worrying about things that are no longer your responsibility." My sharp intellect, honed by decades of navigating complex end-of-life decisions, was constantly questioned and undermined. When I protested about violations of patient autonomy I witnessed in the facility, my concerns were immediately dismissed as delusions or confusion typical of someone in your condition. "Let's not get ourselves worked up over imaginary problems," Dr. Miller would say during his weekly visits, his tone suggesting that my entire professional life had been some elaborate fantasy. These concerns about patient rights are just your mind trying to hold on to the past. It's very common in residents experiencing cognitive changes. My attempts to discuss ethical dilemmas or share insights from my hospice experience were met with condescending smiles or treated as signs of agitation that required medication. The woman who had once been consulted by physicians and families facing impossible decisions was now treated like a confused elderly person whose opinions had no value. The most heartbreaking torture came through the carefully orchestrated visits from my grandchildren. Mark and Brenda brought Ethan and Chloe for short, highly supervised encounters that were designed to reinforce the narrative of my supposed decline rather than provide genuine connection or comfort. "Grandma, do you remember who I am?" 12-year-old Ethan would ask, with rehearsed concern, his young face showing confusion that seemed genuine but was clearly coached. "Dad says your memory isn't very good anymore, so I should be patient if you get mixed up about things." They brought me comfort items like adult coloring books and simple puzzles gifts that were insulting in their implications about my mental capacity. 10-year-old Chloe, my sweet granddaughter, who had once asked me thoughtful questions about life and death, now spoke to me as if I were a child who needed constant reassurance. "We brought you some nice pictures to color, Grandma," she would say with forced cheer. "The nurses say it's good for people like you to have simple activities that aren't too challenging or confusing." But the cruelest moment came when Ethan proudly showed me a photograph of himself and Mark standing in front of my beloved home, now bearing a large "Sold" sign. His smile was bright and innocent as he delivered the devastating news. "Dad says you don't need this big house anymore, Grandma," he announced with childish excitement. "He sold it so you can have more money for your care here. Isn't that nice? Now you don't have to worry about taking care of such a big place." The image of my sanctuary, The home where I had planned to spend my final years in dignity and peace, reduced to a real estate transaction, was devastating. But I couldn't show my heartbreak without proving their point about my emotional instability, so I forced myself to nod and smile while my world crumbled around me. The public destruction of my life's work continued with Brenda's calculated social media campaign. She took to various platforms with triumphant announcements about the sale of my home for over $800,000, celebrating this theft as a wise financial decision and a fresh start for their family's future. Her posts included architectural renderings showing the new owner's planned modern renovations that would strip away every trace of my personal touches and historical preservation efforts. The garden where I had found peace, the reading nook where I had studied medical ethics, the kitchen where I had prepared comfort food for grieving families, all of it would be demolished to make way for sterile contemporary improvements. Out with the old, in with the new. Brenda posted alongside these images. Sometimes progress requires letting go of sentimental attachments. Mark's vision for moving forward is exactly what our family needed. This public visual desecration of my life's sanctuary pushed me into a despair so profound I could barely function. Watching my home being systematically erased in digital renderings felt like watching my own identity being demolished. The financial stranglehold around my life tightened with each passing day. I discovered that my personal bank accounts were now entirely controlled by Mark as my court-appointed guardian. My pension payments automatically diverted to an account I could no longer access. My desperate attempts to contact my own lawyer were met with bureaucratic stonewalling from both the facility staff and Mr. Davies, their predatory attorney. Mrs. Ruth, your son is managing your finances very responsibly, the facility administrator would explain with false kindness. These concerns about money are just confusion caused by your condition. You don't need to worry about such complicated matters anymore. I overheard the staff discussing me in ways that confirm my worst fears about their perception of my situation. She's one of our high-maintenance residents, I heard a nurse tell a colleague. The family never visits except for those short obligation calls, and she's always complaining about some imaginary violation of her rights. The systematic isolation was designed to make me doubt my own professional judgment and accept their version of reality. But in my darkest moment of despair, a tiny crack of hope appeared from an unexpected source. A young aide named Jennifer, who seemed genuinely compassionate despite the facility's corrupt atmosphere, noticed my profound sadness and quietly approached me during one of her shifts. Mrs. Ruth, she whispered nervously, glancing around to make sure we weren't being observed. I found this in the staff break room. Someone said it might have belonged to you before you came here. She slipped me a small, worn copy of my favorite medical ethics textbook, a volume I had used throughout my career and thought I had lost forever. Inside the familiar pages hidden between discussions of patient autonomy and family dynamics, I discovered a tiny inscription written in almost invisible pencil, Eleanor's help. The words sparked a fragile but desperate hope that flickered to life in my chest like a candle in the darkness. Doctor, Eleanor Vance had been my personal physician for over 20 years, a woman who understood both my medical condition and my professional commitment to patient rights. If she had managed to leave this message, it meant that somewhere beyond these prison walls, allies were still fighting for my dignity and autonomy. The inscription reminded me that my hidden journal notes documenting my children's systematic violations of my rights might still be accessible to those who knew where to look. For the first time since my imprisonment began, I felt something beyond despair, a fragile but growing determination to survive long enough to see justice done. As I held that textbook, my hands trembling with a mixture of hope and resolve, I realized that my children had made a critical error in their systematic cruelty. They had assumed that isolating me would break my spirit completely, but they had forgotten the strength that comes from knowing the truth and having allies who believe in fundamental human dignity. The profound psychological torment continued. The terror of losing my professional identity haunted my days, and the complete loss of agency felt suffocating. But beneath the crushing despair, something precious was growing, a burning need for vindication that would soon consume everything in its path. The systematic destruction of my professional reputation reached its most sophisticated and devastating phase when Mark and Brenda orchestrated what they called a patient advocacy in elder care conference. This highly publicized national event was designed not just to steal my legacy, but to completely rewrite the narrative of my life's work as a cautionary tale about outdated methods and dangerous patient advocacy. Mark positioned himself as the keynote speaker, presenting a carefully fabricated case study that was clearly based on my illness and our family's situation, though distorted beyond recognition. The conference program described him as a pioneering advocate for family-centered care who had successfully navigated the challenges of managing difficult elderly patients with unrealistic expectations. Today, I want to share a deeply personal case study that demonstrates the critical importance of recognizing when traditional patient advocacy approaches can actually harm vulnerable elderly individuals. Mark announced to an audience of healthcare professionals and family caregivers, "Sometimes the most compassionate thing we can do is protect our loved ones from their own misguided attempts to maintain control." He displayed charts and graphs that twisted my reasonable concerns about informed consent and patient autonomy into evidence of stubborn noncompliance and dangerous resistance to necessary care. My careful documentation of treatment options and side effects was presented as proof of obsessive behavior that indicated cognitive decline rather than professional expertise. Under previous advocacy models, Mark continued with authority I had never seen him display. Patients were encouraged to maintain unrealistic levels of control over their care decisions, even when their judgment was clearly compromised by illness or age. The transformation to family-centered decision-making requires decisive action to overcome this resistance. Brenda played her role perfectly, giving carefully rehearsed testimonials about Mark's courage in overcoming the past trauma of dealing with a difficult patient, clearly referring to me without naming me directly. She spoke about my supposed emotional manipulation and stubborn refusal to accept help. Mark's mother was a classic example of how professional healthcare experience can actually become a liability in personal care situations. Brenda explained to the audience with false compassion. Her background in hospice care made her think she knew better than the specialists we consulted, leading to dangerous delays in treatment and unnecessary family conflict. Her performance was masterful in its cruelty, transforming my decades of successful patient advocacy into a narrative of professional arrogance and family disruption. Every technique I had developed to protect vulnerable patients was dismissed as evidence of my inability to accept my own vulnerability. The most devastating moment came when I was forced to witness this public assassination of my character. A board staff member at the facility had turned on the national news just as a segment about the conference began airing, and I sat in my wheelchair, unable to escape as my life's work was dissected and mocked on television. The cameras showed Mark and Brenda posing beside displays of medical ethics publications and patient advocacy materials, now presented as examples of outdated approaches that could harm rather than help elderly patients. My precious philosophy of patient autonomy was being used as proof of dangerous thinking that families needed to overcome. These traditional advocacy methods can actually enable harmful behavior in elderly patients, the reporter explained while the camera panned over materials that represented my life's work. The conference demonstrates how modern family-centered care can provide better outcomes through decisive intervention and professional oversight. Watching my professional legacy being twisted into a public performance of my supposed incompetence was unbearable. My body trembled with rage and despair as I witnessed strangers discussing my limitations while my own family profited from the systematic destruction of everything I had worked to build. But the cruelest violation came through 12-year-old Ethan's prominent appearance in a pre-recorded video segment. My grandson clearly coached and rehearsed, spoke with disturbing confidence about concepts he couldn't possibly understand at his age. "I've learned so much about compassionate care from my dad," Ethan declared to the camera with practiced authority. "It's important to move beyond rigid patient choices and focus on what families think is best. Sometimes people can't see what's good for them, and that's when families have to make tough decisions." His words, delivered with the innocent conviction that only a child could provide, served as the perfect endorsement of their narrative. Here was the next generation, they suggested, freed from the burden of outdated patient advocacy and equipped with modern understanding of family-centered care. "My dad taught me that sometimes you have to ignore what people say they want and focus on what they actually need." Ethan continued, his young face serious and concerned. "That's how you show real love and compassion." This public manipulation of my beloved grandson represented a violation so profound it left me gasping for breath. They had not only stolen my professional reputation, but had corrupted the mind of an innocent child, turning him into a weapon against everything I had worked to protect. The conference also featured Dr. Thompson, their compromised alternative practitioner, presenting himself as an expert witness on patient noncompliance and family conflict resolution. His presentation provided the false veneer of medical authority that transformed their exploitation into a legitimate healthcare approach. "We must be vigilant for signs that elderly patients are using their professional background to resist necessary care," Dr. Thompson explained with clinical detachment. Former healthcare workers can be particularly challenging because they believe their outdated training gives them special insight into their own conditions. His words provided the medical justification that Mark and Brenda needed to continue their systematic abuse while maintaining the appearance of responsible caregiving. Here was a licensed professional validating their claims that my resistance to their control was pathological rather than rational. But not everyone in the audience was fooled by their performance. Dr. Margaret Stevens, a respected retired hospice director who had known me for over 15 years, watched the proceedings with growing disgust and alarm. She recognized the subtle character assassination taking place and understood that something deeply wrong was happening to a colleague she had always respected. Dr. Stevens immediately contacted Dr. Eleanor Vance, my personal physician, after the conference ended. "Something is very wrong with this story about Ruth," she told her urgently. "I've known her for years, and her commitment to patient advocacy was always impeccable. This conference feels like a coordinated attack on someone who can't defend herself." Her willingness to speak up for the truth provided a crucial turning point in what seemed like a hopeless situation. She began preparing a detailed professional affidavit documenting my competence and ethical standards, creating an objective counter-narrative to the lies being spread about my professional judgment. As I sat in that sterile facility room, forced to watch my career being systematically destroyed and perverted for my family's gain, I felt a searing rage unlike anything I had ever experienced. The calculated public dismantling of my reputation, my grandson's innocent complicity in their lies, and the theft of my professional identity created a burning desperation to break free and expose their ultimate deception. The profound intellectual and professional violation they had committed would not go unanswered. Every lie they told, every manipulation they orchestrated, every cruel performance they staged was being documented by allies they didn't know existed. The tide was beginning to turn, even if they couldn't see it yet. The final phase of Mark and Brenda's assault on my existence was a devastating financial campaign designed to leave me completely destitute and utterly dependent on their mercy. Mark, leveraging his cunning and Brenda's extensive network of corrupt contacts, initiated what could only be described as economic warfare against his own mother. The attack came in the form of a frivolous but legally complex lawsuit filed for $1 million, claiming emotional distress and irreparable damage to his reputation due to my alleged stubborn refusal of care and deliberate mismanagement of my personal finances. The lawsuit was carefully crafted to force me into massive legal fees I could no longer afford, while simultaneously painting me as a vindictive old woman trying to destroy her own son's life. Mrs. Ruth has engaged in a sustained campaign of non-compliance and emotional manipulation that has severely impacted my client's professional standing and personal well-being, Mark's lawyer announced to the press. This lawsuit seeks appropriate compensation for the damages caused by her refusal to accept necessary medical care and her deliberate attempts to undermine her family's efforts to help her. But the lawsuit was only the beginning of their systematic destruction of my remaining resources. Mark contacted my former hospice organization and retirement fund administrators, falsely reporting serious concerns about my mental competence and erratic behavior. He claimed that I was unfit to manage my own finances and suggested that my past patient advocacy work had been questionable. These fabricated reports led to a devastating blow that completed my professional and financial destruction. The State Hospice Licensing Board, convinced by Mark's lies about my supposed mental decline, permanently revoked my volunteer credentials and removed me from their registry of approved coordinators. My hospice pension earned through decades of dedicated service was terminated due to alleged gross misconduct in my advocacy work. After careful review of concerning reports about Mrs. Ruth's current mental state and retrospective analysis of her past advocacy practices, the pension administrator wrote in a formal letter, "We have determined that her eligibility for continued benefits must be terminated effective immediately." The loss of my pension, combined with the mounting legal fees from Mark's frivolous lawsuit, culminated in a nightmare I had never imagined possible forced eviction from the modest apartment I had been moved to after Memory Lane Gardens could no longer house me without payment. Brenda, with characteristic cruelty, deliberately timed and publicized my eviction to attract maximum media attention. She contacted local news outlets, framing my homelessness as the inevitable result of mental illness and refusal to accept family help, rather than the systematic theft of my resources. "We've tried everything to help Ruth," Brenda explained to the cameras with false compassion. "But she's been so consumed by paranoid delusions about her care that she's pushed away everyone who loves her. It's heartbreaking to watch someone self-destruct like this. The day of my eviction, I found myself standing on the sidewalk with my few remaining belongings stuffed into garbage bags, surrounded by news cameras and curious onlookers. The woman who had once been trusted with family's most intimate end-of-life decisions was now a public spectacle of failure and abandonment. Former hospice volunteer Ruth Henderson faces homelessness after family disputes and mounting legal costs, the news reporter announced while I stood there in humiliation. Her family describes the situation as tragic, but says they've exhausted all options for helping her accept necessary care. The profound public disgrace burned through me like acid. To be reduced to a homeless charity case in front of people who had once sought my guidance and respected my judgment felt like the complete destruction of everything I had ever been. Mark and Lisa, fully absorbed in their comfortable lives and the narrative they had helped create, maintained a chilling indifference to my destitution. When reporters asked Mark about his mother's situation, his response was swift and calculated. "I have no legal or moral obligation to support someone who refuses to accept reality," he stated with practiced authority. "We've tried to help her, but she's chosen to pursue these destructive conspiracy theories instead of accepting the care she needs." Lisa was equally dismissive, posting on social media about her incredibly busy schedule, with subtle implications that I was causing unnecessary drama for attention. Both of them actively avoided any location where they might encounter me, unable to face the human cost of their systematic betrayal. But Brenda's cruelty reached new heights with her most audacious display of stolen wealth. Using my entire $800,000 retirement savings that she and Mark had systematically stolen through their guardianship scheme, she purchased a massive, custom-built medical spa that cost more than most people's homes. She then publicly dedicated this extravagant facility to Mark as a tribute to his courageous advocacy for family wellness, making sure photographs were widely shared across social media platforms. The spa featured state-of-the-art equipment and luxury amenities that mocked my own modest but dignified retirement plans. This beautiful wellness center represents Mark's vision and dedication to helping families navigate difficult healthcare decisions. Brenda posted alongside professionally photographed images. Sometimes the best way to honor someone's legacy is by building something better for the future. The images showed her posing in a facility that had been purchased with money literally stolen from my life savings, all presented as evidence of Mark's success and vision. The cruelty was breathtaking in its calculated precision, my stolen retirement transformed into a monument to their triumph over my resistance. The relentless psychological and financial siege, combined with the lack of proper medical care for my scleroderma in the homeless shelter, pushed my body beyond its limits. The stress of losing everything I had worked for, combined with the inadequate medical attention available to homeless patients, created a perfect storm of physical collapse. I was standing in line at the shelter's medical clinic, waiting for basic care I couldn't afford anywhere else, when a crushing pain in my chest made the world spin around me. The heart attack was swift and merciless, dropping me to the floor as concerned strangers called for an ambulance. I was rushed to the emergency room with my life hanging by a thread, my body finally rebelling against the immense pressure my own family had subjected me to. As consciousness faded, I was completely alone, no family by my bedside, no visitors bringing comfort, just the stark reality of abandonment by those who should have loved me most. But in the depths of unconsciousness, something unexpected happened. Fragments of memory began to surface, pieces of a hospice case I had handled decades ago that suddenly seemed relevant to my current situation. In my dreamlike state, I recalled a family I had worked with whose adult children had systematically denied their father's end-of-life wishes, using his illness as an excuse to seize control of his decisions. The memory was vivid and disturbing. I remembered how the son had dismissed his father's advanced directives, claiming that illness had made him incompetent to make decisions. I recalled the daughter's manipulation of medical information to justify treatments the patient had specifically refused. Most chilling of all, I remembered how they had used the father's professional background against him, claiming that his medical knowledge made him too stubborn to accept help. This agonizing memory crystallized into a devastating realization. Mark's controlling behavior wasn't just cruel. It was a pattern I had witnessed before in families who used illness as an excuse to exploit vulnerable relatives. The confirmation that I was a victim of systematic manipulation rather than a confused patient ignited a flicker of life and fierce determination deep within my failing body. The profound financial terror and utter despair that had driven me to the brink of death now transformed into something far more dangerous, a desperate, furious resolve fueled by the knowledge that my professional experience had given me unique insight into the nature of my own abuse. If I survived this final assault, I would use everything I had learned about family manipulation and patient advocacy to expose the truth about what my children had done to me. The woman who had spent her career protecting vulnerable patients was about to apply those skills to the most important case of her life. From my hospital bed, slowly recovering from the heart attack that had nearly killed me, I felt a clarity that cut through the fog of pain and medication like a surgical blade. The recovered memory of that previous hospice case had given me a devastating new understanding of the systematic nature of my children's abuse. This wasn't just personal cruelty. It was a recognizable pattern of family exploitation that I had witnessed and documented throughout my career. Fueled by this terrible insight, I decided to make one final attempt to reach whatever remained of my son's buried conscience. With the help of Maria, a compassionate nurse who had witnessed my family's callous treatment during their rare visits, I recorded a raw, emotional video message that laid bare everything I had discovered about their systematic campaign to destroy my autonomy. Mark. I began looking directly into the camera with eyes that had seen too much betrayal. This is your mother speaking what may be my final words to you. I'm not here to accuse or manipulate. I'm here to tell you the truth about what you've done to me and why it matters beyond our family. I played excerpts from audio recordings I had secretly made during our early confrontations when they had been less careful about revealing their true motivations. Their own voices filled the hospital room, revealing the calculated nature of their dismissal of my rights and their explicit discussions about minimizing my burden on their lives. You can hear it in your own words. I continued, my voice breaking with emotion. The way you dismissed my professional expertise, the way you chose control over compassion, the way you transformed my illness into your opportunity to seize power over my life and assets. But the most powerful part of my message was my detailed explanation of my advanced directives and my lifelong commitment to patient autonomy. I spoke about specific cases where I had helped families navigate similar situations with dignity and respect, contrasting their approach with the systematic abuse I was experiencing. I've spent 40 years advocating for patients' rights to make their own decisions about their bodies and their care, I said with whatever strength I could muster. My advanced directives are clear, my mental capacity is intact, and my right to refuse unwanted treatment is absolute. What you've done to me isn't love. It's the same kind of exploitation I've spent my career fighting against. The video was meant to be a private appeal to Mark's conscience, a final attempt to reach the son I had once known beneath the controlling stranger he had become. Maria promised to deliver it directly to him, hoping that seeing his mother's broken condition and hearing her professional perspective might finally penetrate his walls of justification. But Brenda, who had bribed multiple hospital staff members to monitor all my communications, intercepted the message before Mark could see it. Her response was swift and devastating. She immediately recognized the video's potential to destroy their carefully constructed narrative and moved to weaponize it against me. Using sophisticated editing software and her network of media contacts, Brenda manipulated my desperate plea beyond recognition. She altered the tone of my voice to make me sound paranoid and aggressive, spliced segments out of context to create false statements, added ominous background music to suggest mental instability, and cut crucial explanations that provided context for my concerns. Watch as this troubled elderly woman attempts to manipulate her own family using fabricated recordings and professional jargon. Brenda announced in her own video response, "This is clear evidence of the delusional thinking and emotional manipulation that has made her family's situation so difficult." She sold the heavily doctored video to a prominent national health news channel, framing it as definitive proof of my deteriorating mental state and desperate attempts to avoid necessary medical care. My professional explanations about patient rights were twisted into evidence of grandiose delusions and attempts to manipulate medical professionals. The video went viral within hours, spreading across social media platforms with commentary that painted me as a difficult patient trying to guilt-trip her devoted family and avoid accepting help for my obvious mental decline. My desperate plea for basic human dignity had been transformed into a weapon that proved their point about my supposed incompetence. Mark and Lisa's response was the final nail in the coffin of any hope I had harbored for reconciliation. They appeared on national television within days, giving perfectly coordinated interviews that were calculated to generate maximum sympathy while destroying any credibility I might have retained. This situation is absolutely heartbreaking for our entire family. Mark said, his voice cracking with what appeared to be genuine emotion. Watching our mother's mental deterioration has been devastating. We've tried everything: medical intervention, family counseling, professional care, but her paranoid delusions continue to escalate. Lisa played her supporting role perfectly, offering subtle nods of agreement and looks of feigned sympathy that publicly reinforced Mark's narrative. "We just want Mom to accept the help she needs," she added with tears in her eyes. But her background in healthcare has made her think she knows better than the specialists we've consulted. It's tragic to watch someone you love lose touch with reality. They brought Ethan onto the program, my 13-year-old grandson, now looking genuinely sad and confused as he had been coached to express concern for his troubled grandmother. "I love Grandma," Ethan said with heartbreaking sincerity. "But Dad says she's sick in her mind, and that's why she says scary things about us. I just want her to get better and stop being so angry all the time." The interview was masterfully crafted to present them as long-suffering family members, heroically managing a difficult situation, while I was portrayed as a delusional patient whose professional background had made her dangerous to herself and others. The segment was shared millions of times, with viewers expressing sympathy for my family's impossible situation and criticism of my manipulative behavior. But even as my public image crumbled beyond repair, a crucial ally was working behind the scenes to document the truth. Dr. Eleanor Vance, my personal physician, who had known me for over 20 years, had been contacted by Dr. Margaret Stevens and was conducting her own investigation into my case. Her analysis of Brenda's manipulated video revealed clear evidence of digital tampering, altered audio frequencies, spliced segments, and background additions that proved the message had been heavily doctored. More importantly, her medical records of my treatment showed a clear pattern of competent decision-making and rational treatment preferences that contradicted the narrative of mental decline. "This isn't just elder abuse," she told Dr. Stevens during one of their private conversations. "This is medical fraud designed to justify systematic exploitation. Ruth's story is being suppressed because the truth would expose a conspiracy that violates every principle of medical ethics." Her willingness to risk her professional reputation to support my case provided a turning point that I couldn't yet see from my hospital bed. While the world saw only a confused old woman making desperate accusations, a small group of principled healthcare professionals was building a case that would eventually expose the truth. As I lay in that hospital bed, watching my deepest suffering being publicly twisted and used as evidence of my mental instability, I felt the weight of complete defeat. My voice had been stolen and transformed into a weapon against me. My children had publicly disowned my truth, and my professional reputation had been destroyed by people who had never spent a day caring for vulnerable patients. But beneath the crushing despair, something unbreakable remained: the knowledge that truth has a power all its own. Somewhere in the evidence I had carefully documented in the witnesses who had observed their cruelty in the medical records that would eventually surface lay the ammunition for a justice I might not live to see, but that would eventually come. They had silenced me, but they could not silence everyone. The truth was still there, waiting to be uncovered by those brave enough to challenge the lies and fight for the fundamental rights of vulnerable patients everywhere. During my slow recovery from the near-fatal heart attack, something extraordinary began to unfold that would vindicate not just my personal suffering, but the fundamental principles of patient autonomy I had spent my career defending. The network of allies that Dr. Eleanor Vance and Dr. Margaret Stevens had assembled, including a retired medical ethicist, a seasoned patient advocate, and compassionate members from various hospice support groups, had been working tirelessly to expose the systematic abuse I had endured. Their efforts culminated in an emergency hearing before the State Medical Ethics Board, a powerful regulatory body with the authority to investigate violations of medical ethics and patient rights. The hearing attracted significant media attention, with reporters and medical professionals gathering to witness what many were calling a landmark case in elder abuse and medical autonomy. The hearing room was packed with observers as my legal team prepared to present evidence that would expose not only Mark and Brenda's systematic abuse, but also Dr. Thompson's unethical practices and the broader conspiracy that had nearly destroyed my life. The moment that changed everything came when my attorney announced that we had irrefutable audio evidence of the conspiracy. The recordings captured by my home security system and my medical ethics journal dictation recorder contained hours of conversations that revealed the true nature of my family's treatment of me. As Mark's voice filled the hearing room, cold and calculating, dismissing my pain and rationalizing their abandonment, the assembled board members sat in stunned silence. The contrast between his public persona as a caring son and his private callousness was devastating to witness. "Mom's just being difficult about the treatments," Mark's voice said with chilling indifference. She thinks her medical background gives her special insight, but she's just a stubborn old woman who can't accept that she's sick. We need to do whatever it takes to control the situation. Brenda's voice was even more damning, explicitly discussing their financial motivations and legal strategies. The $1 million lawsuit threat is working perfectly, she said with obvious satisfaction. We're draining her savings exactly as planned. She'll have to comply eventually, or we'll just wait for her to die and take everything anyway. But perhaps the most chilling moment came when Brenda's voice, captured during one of their private conversations, revealed the depths of their cruelty. Ruth has no humanity left anyway. She's just a burden taking up space and resources. The sooner we can get rid of her completely, the better for everyone. The recordings also captured Dr. Thompson explicitly giving unethical advice, confirming his complicity in the conspiracy. Don't worry about her complaints about informed consent, his voice said with professional arrogance. Elderly patients often resist necessary treatments. Just keep pressuring her until she complies and document everything as evidence of her mental decline. The raw indifference and shocking lack of humanity in their voices, directly contradicting their public facade of caring concern, shocked the entire board and the watching public. Here was undeniable proof of systematic elder abuse, financial exploitation, and medical fraud. Dr. Thompson, confronted with the overwhelming evidence and facing the authority of the ethics board, broke down completely. His carefully maintained professional composure crumbled as he confessed to his unethical practices and complicity in fabricating reports about my mental state. I was paid substantial fees to provide documentation supporting their claims, he admitted through tears of shame and terror. I knew the treatments I recommended were unproven and potentially harmful, but they promised me ongoing consulting contracts if I helped them maintain control over Mrs. Henderson's care. His testimony revealed the depth of the conspiracy and led to his immediate professional disgrace and permanent license revocation. The man who had taken an oath to first do no harm had participated in one of the most systematic cases of medical abuse the board had ever encountered. When Mark was called to testify, the transformation was immediate and devastating. The confident manipulator who had spoken so eloquently at medical conferences about managing difficult elderly patients was confronted with the irrefutable evidence of his own recorded words and actions. As his voice echoed through the hearing room, casually discussing the theft of my assets and the deliberate destruction of my autonomy, something fundamental broke inside him. The facade he had maintained for years crumbled completely, revealing the broken man beneath. Mark began to hyperventilate on the witness stand, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he tried to maintain his composure. But the weight of his deception, the magnitude of his betrayal, and the complete destruction of his public image proved too much to bear. I can't do this anymore, he whispered, his voice barely audible through the microphone. Then louder with increasing hysteria, she's right. We destroyed her. We stole everything from her and convinced ourselves it was for her own good. His confession dissolved into incoherent sobs as he collapsed on the witness stand, overwhelmed by the irreversible ruin of his reputation and the undeniable evidence of his cruelty. The sight of him, a man who had once seemed so successful and confident, utterly destroyed by his own greed and manipulation, was profoundly heartbreaking even for me. Despite everything he had done, watching my son's complete psychological destruction brought me no joy. This was still the child I had raised, whose mental health crisis I had sacrificed my career to address, whose recovery I had funded from my own savings. Brenda's reaction was equally devastating, but in a different way. As the full scope of her manipulation and financial exploitation was revealed, she attempted to flee the hearing room, but was immediately restrained by court security. Her cunning facade collapsed into desperate tears and utter disgrace, as her role as the primary architect of the conspiracy was laid bare for all to see. "It wasn't my idea," she screamed as she was restrained. "He wanted to control his mother. I was just helping him protect the family assets." But the recordings contradicted her desperate lies, clearly showing her as the mastermind behind many of the most cruel and calculated aspects of my abuse. Mr. Davies, their lawyer, was publicly sanctioned by the board and faced his own professional consequences for his role in facilitating the systematic exploitation of a vulnerable patient. Lisa was present during the hearing, and watching her reaction to the damning evidence was one of the most complex moments of the entire proceedings. As she heard the truth about Mark and Brenda's conspiracy, as she understood the full scope of my suffering, she was overwhelmed by profound shame and guilt for her passive complicity. She broke down completely openly, sobbing in the hearing room, burying her face in her hands as she finally understood the magnitude of her cowardice. When our eyes met across the room, I saw in her face the daughter I had raised, not the silent accomplice who had stood by while I was destroyed, but the child who had once trusted me completely. Her silent plea for forgiveness was clear, her remorse authentic, but she understood that forgiveness would have to be earned through action, not just tears. As I sat in that hearing room, vindicated at last, but emotionally drained by the painful exposure of my family's systematic cruelty, I felt a profound sense of relief wash over me. The truth was finally out-documented beyond any possible denial. My voice had been heard, my rights defended, my dignity restored. The profound vindication was overwhelming, but it was accompanied by a deep sadness for what my family had become. Mark's devastating collapse, Brenda's utter disgrace, Lisa's genuine remorse, these were the complex emotions of victory that came at an enormous human cost. But beneath it all was something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Real, tangible hope for a future where my autonomy would be protected, my story told truthfully, and my remaining years lived with the dignity and respect every patient deserves. The State Medical Ethics Board's verdict was swift, decisive, and unequivocal in its condemnation of the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed my life. Dr. Patricia Coleman, the board's chairwoman, delivered the ruling with a moral authority that left no room for appeal or misunderstanding. This board finds the evidence of systematic elder abuse, financial exploitation, and unethical medical practices to be overwhelming and deeply disturbing, she announced to the packed hearing room. The defendants have violated not only state laws regarding patient rights and financial exploitation, but have fundamentally betrayed the trust that must exist between families and vulnerable patients. Mark and Brenda were found guilty of criminal elder abuse and financial exploitation, receiving severe public reprimands and formal sanctions that would follow them for the rest of their lives. They faced mandatory therapy, substantial fines, and permanent restrictions on their ability to serve as medical decision-makers for elderly relatives. Dr. Thompson's medical license was permanently revoked, and he faced criminal charges for his role in the systematic deception. His name would be removed from all professional associations, and his career in medicine was effectively over. Mr. Davies received formal sanctions from the State Bar Association, with his reputation permanently tarnished by his participation in the exploitation of a vulnerable patient. But more important than the punishments was the board's formal vindication of my character and professional integrity. Dr. Coleman issued a written statement that explicitly recognized my lifelong commitment to patient autonomy and my unwavering advocacy for vulnerable individuals. Ruth Henderson is a woman of exemplary character whose professional integrity and personal dignity have been systematically undermined by those who should have protected her, the board declared. Her decades of service as a hospice volunteer coordinator represent the highest ideals of medical ethics and patient advocacy. This board finds no evidence whatsoever of mental decline, professional incompetence, or inappropriate patient behavior. The legal validation was a profound restoration of my dignity and professional legacy. After months of being portrayed as a confused, difficult patient, I was officially recognized as the competent, ethical woman I had always been. The board's words carried the weight of medical authority and the power of truth. The financial restitution was substantial, over $800,000, when my stolen savings, punitive damages, and legal fees were calculated. But more importantly, the board's ruling established legal precedents that would protect other elderly patients from similar family-based exploitation. Mark's downfall was as complete as it was tragic. From the rehabilitation center where he was receiving court-ordered therapy, he began sending me letters that revealed the true depths of his psychological collapse and growing understanding of his crimes. "Mom," he wrote in handwriting that shook with emotion, "I have no words that can express the depth of my shame and regret. I turned your illness into an excuse to control you, and I convinced myself that my cruelty was compassion. I know I destroyed the most important relationship in my life, and I don't expect forgiveness. I just need you to know that I recognize the monster I became." His letters continued over the months documenting his therapy sessions. His growing understanding of how fear and entitlement had corrupted his values, and his desperate attempts to comprehend how he had become someone capable of such systematic cruelty toward his own mother. "I wake up every day knowing that I betrayed the woman who saved my life," he confessed in one particularly painful letter. "I turned your love into a weapon against you, and I used your illness as an excuse to steal your dignity. I can't undo what I've done, but I can spend the rest of my life trying to become someone worthy of your forgiveness." Reading his letters filled me with complex emotions: sorrow for what he had become, cautious, hope for his potential redemption, and a growing willingness to leave the door open for future reconciliation if he proved capable of genuine change. Brenda's fate was equally devastating, but far less sympathetic. Abandoned by Mark as he focused on his own recovery, she found herself completely isolated and disgraced. Her carefully cultivated social media presence disappeared overnight as former friends distanced themselves from the scandal. Her ambitions for wealth and social prominence lay in ruins, replaced by the bitter reality of public shame and financial hardship. She faced her own legal challenges as prosecutors explored charges related to her role in the financial exploitation and systematic abuse. The woman who had once orchestrated my destruction now lived a lonely, bitter existence, consumed by the consequences of her own cruelty. But the most hopeful development came from Lisa, who approached me after the board's ruling with genuine humility and a commitment to making amends that went far beyond mere words. "Mom," she said through tears that seemed to come from the deepest part of her soul, "I know I can't undo my cowardice or take back the silence that enabled your suffering, but I want to spend whatever time you'll give me proving that I can be the daughter you deserved all along." Her commitment to reconciliation proved genuine and unwavering. She began by publicly contradicting the false narrative she had once supported, giving interviews where she acknowledged her mother's competence and her own failures. She took full responsibility for her passive complicity and worked tirelessly to help rebuild what had been destroyed. Lisa became my steadfast advocate and companion, helping me navigate the complex process of rebuilding my life and reputation. The process was slow and sometimes painful, but it was authentic in ways our previous relationship had never been. "I'm learning what real courage looks like," she told me during one of our healing conversations. "You showed me that fighting for truth is more important than avoiding conflict, and I'm trying to live up to that example." The impact on my grandchildren was both heartbreaking and ultimately hopeful. Ethan and Chloe, now teenagers who could understand the full scope of what had happened, were deeply traumatized by their father's crimes and their own unwitting participation in my abuse. They underwent extensive therapy to process the complex emotions of learning that their father was undergoing mandatory rehabilitation and that their coached performances had been part of a campaign to destroy their grandmother's autonomy. The guilt they felt was profound, but it was the beginning of their own healing journey. When they finally came to visit me in my restored home, their young faces were marked by sadness, but also by a dawning understanding of truth and justice. "Grandma," Ethan said, his voice breaking with emotion, "we didn't understand what we were doing. We thought we were helping Dad protect you, but we were really helping him hurt you. We're so sorry." Chloe, now a young woman with her own sense of moral clarity, added, "We want to learn about patient rights and medical ethics from you. We want to understand what you really believe in and why it matters so much." Their questions about medical autonomy and patient advocacy opened necessary conversations about dignity, respect, and the courage required to defend vulnerable people, even when it's difficult. Despite their trauma, I saw in them the potential to become the empathetic, principled adults they were capable of being. As I stood in my home, surrounded by the legal documents that restored my rights and dignity, I felt a profound sense of completion mixed with deep sadness for all that had been lost. The truth had prevailed, but at an enormous cost to my family's relationships and my own peace of mind. The victory was complete in legal terms, but it was bittersweet in human terms. My son was broken and distant, struggling with the consequences of choices that had destroyed his life. My daughter was on a difficult but genuine path to redemption. My grandchildren were healing from trauma while learning to distinguish between love and manipulation. Yet beneath the complex emotions was something precious and unshakable, the knowledge that I had fought for truth and one that justice had prevailed, and that my voice would now be heard by countless others facing similar battles for their fundamental rights and dignity. 3 years after the ethics board hearing that vindicated my life's work and exposed the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed me, I wake each morning with a profound sense of gratitude that still surprises me with its intensity. My home has been meticulously restored to the sanctuary of peace and dignity I had always envisioned for my retirement years. The house itself tells the story of my transformation. The rooms that once echoed with the silence of isolation now ring with the frequent laughter of Lisa and my grandchildren, their presence a testament to the healing power of truth and genuine remorse. The medical equipment that had once symbolized my loss of autonomy has been replaced by the tools of my renewed purpose: a desk where I write advocacy materials, bookshelves filled with medical ethics texts, and a comfortable chair where I counsel other patients facing similar battles. My health, while still requiring careful management for my scleroderma, has improved dramatically since the elimination of the constant stress and emotional abuse that had been accelerating my decline. Proper medical care delivered with respect for my autonomy and expertise has allowed me to maintain my independence and quality of life far beyond what my family's care had promised. The simple pleasures of life have returned, reading without surveillance, making my own medical decisions, choosing when and how to spend my recovered savings. The profound contentment that comes from living authentically free from manipulation and control has given me an energy and purpose I thought I had lost forever. Mark's journey toward redemption continues from a distance, but it has been more sustained and genuine than I initially dared to hope. His letters arrive regularly, each one showing deeper insight into his actions and stronger commitment to personal transformation. "Mom," he wrote in his most recent letter, "I understand now that I used your illness as an excuse to act out my own fears and insecurities. I was terrified of losing you, so I tried to control you completely. I turned your love into a prison, and I convinced myself that my cruelty was protection." His ongoing therapy has revealed the complex psychological factors that contributed to his behavior, his unresolved trauma from his teenage suicide attempt, his fear of abandonment, and his inability to see me as a complete person rather than just his mother. While these factors don't excuse his actions, they provide a framework for understanding and potentially healing. "I'm learning that real love means respecting someone's autonomy even when it scares you," he continued. "I can't undo the damage I caused, but I can make sure I never again choose control over compassion." Our correspondence has evolved into something I never expected: honest conversations about our family's history, his understanding of patient rights, and his hopes for eventual reconciliation. While a fully restored relationship remains uncertain, the foundation of truth and mutual respect has been established. Lisa has become the daughter I always hoped she would be, but in ways deeper and more authentic than my original dreams. Our relationship, rebuilt on foundations of honesty and hard-won wisdom, has blossomed into a bond that enriches both our lives profoundly. She works alongside me in my advocacy efforts, using her own experience with family manipulation to help other adult children recognize and resist similar pressures. We spend our days researching patient rights cases, writing articles about medical autonomy, and supporting others who are fighting for their dignity in healthcare settings. "Mom," she told me recently as we prepared for a conference presentation, "I've learned that real love isn't about protecting someone from their choices. It's about supporting them in making the choices that align with their values, even when those choices are difficult." Lisa's transformation has been genuine and lasting. She's become my fiercest advocate, ensuring that my story continues to be told accurately and that other elderly patients facing similar abuse know they have allies in their fight for autonomy. My grandchildren's healing has been one of the most rewarding aspects of this new chapter. Ethan and Chloe, now young adults who have worked through their trauma with excellent therapists, have developed authentic relationships with me based on mutual respect and shared values. Ethan, now studying bioethics with a focus on patient advocacy, often brings his textbooks to our conversations, eager to learn from my experiences and contribute to protecting vulnerable patients. "Grandma," he said during one of our recent talks, "I want to understand not just what happened to you, but how to prevent it from happening to other families." Chloe, pursuing a degree in social work with a specialization in elder abuse prevention, has found her own way to honor our family's commitment to justice. She's written extensively about her experience as a child, manipulated by adults, and her work has helped other young people understand the difference between genuine family loyalty and harmful manipulation. Their presence in my daily life represents hope for the future, a generation that understands the importance of autonomy, the danger of medical paternalism, and the courage required to stand up for vulnerable patients, even when it's difficult. Brenda remains isolated and bitter, her life serving as a stark reminder of how greed and manipulation ultimately destroy those who practice them. Her attempts to rehabilitate her image have failed repeatedly, and she faces the remainder of her years bearing the social consequences of her systematic cruelty. The most meaningful transformation in my life has been my emergence as a national advocate for patient autonomy, elder abuse prevention, and ethical medical care. Working with my legal allies and drawing on my professional background as a hospice volunteer coordinator, I've become a prominent voice in the fight against family-based medical exploitation. My memoir, The Right to Choose: A Patient's Fight for Dignity, has become essential reading for medical professionals, ethicists, and families facing complex healthcare decisions. The book details not just my personal story, but provides practical guidance for recognizing and preventing similar abuse. I speak at medical conferences and ethics seminars across the country, sharing my experience and educating audiences about the warning signs of family-based medical manipulation. My message is both personal and universal. Patient autonomy is not optional and vulnerable. Individuals deserve protection from exploitation disguised as love. The hospice support group I founded meets monthly in my home, providing a safe space for patients and families to discuss complex end-of-life decisions with dignity and respect. These individuals have become my chosen family, offering understanding and support that only fellow advocates can provide. Ruth, one group member, recently told me, "Your courage in fighting for your rights didn't just save you, it saved all of us. You showed us that we're never too vulnerable to demand respect and never too sick to maintain our dignity." My work has contributed to significant legislative changes, strengthening patient rights protections and improving oversight of family-based medical decision-making. The systematic failures that enabled my abuse have been addressed through new training programs, accountability measures, and victim advocacy resources. Most importantly, I found immense joy and profound meaning in transforming my pain into positive change. My days are filled with purposeful activity, genuine relationships, and the quiet satisfaction of a life lived authentically and independently. The victory is complete not just in terms of justice, but in the deeper sense of having reclaimed my autonomy, my purpose, and my dignity. The woman who was once silenced and controlled has become a powerful advocate whose influence extends far beyond her own story. As I sit in my garden each evening surrounded by the flowers I tend with my own hands, according to my own choices, I reflect on the journey that brought me here. The abuse was devastating, the fight was agonizing, but the transformation has been miraculous. I have not just survived, I have thrived, finding purpose in pain and strength in suffering. The legacy I'm building now is one of courage, truth, and unwavering commitment to human dignity. This is the life I was meant to live free, authentic and dedicated to ensuring that no patient ever endures what I experienced in silence. Years have passed since that terrifying period when my own children turned my illness into an excuse to strip away my autonomy and dignity, transforming from loving family members into controlling strangers who saw my vulnerability as an opportunity for exploitation. Now I radiate an unshakable inner peace that was hard-won through immense adversity and the kind of struggle that tests the very foundations of what it means to be human. My cherished home, once threatened by those who claim to love me, has become a sanctuary of vibrant life and authentic relationships. The rooms are frequently filled with the genuine laughter of Lisa and my grandchildren, our bonds rebuilt on foundations of honesty, respect, and deep affection that run deeper than our previous relationships ever did. I have become a respected voice in the national conversation about patient rights, elder abuse, and the fundamental importance of medical autonomy. My story serves as a beacon of hope for countless others who are fighting to maintain their dignity and independence in the face of well-meaning but misguided family interference. My days are rich with meaningful pursuits, writing, speaking, teaching, and mentoring, all chosen freely and pursued with the quiet joy that comes from hard-won independence and authentic purpose. Reflecting on my arduous journey through betrayal and back to dignity, I understand now that my greatest strength lay not in blind trust or passive acceptance of others' decisions about my care, but in courageously confronting coercion and fighting for my fundamental right to make my own choices about my body and my life. I learned that self-worth is an unshakable foundation that cannot be destroyed by others' fears or need for control, and that true family is built on genuine respect and understanding rather than manipulation or misguided protection. I carry no bitterness toward those who wronged me, only a profound wisdom gained from transforming my deepest pain into lasting purpose and positive change. My suffering was not meaningless. It became the catalyst for legal reforms, educational programs, and advocacy efforts that continue to protect vulnerable patients from the kind of systematic exploitation I endured. To anyone listening to my story who recognizes their own struggles within it, I offer this essential message. Elder abuse and family control over medical decisions are insidious forms of cruelty that thrive when we remain silent about our rights and accept others' judgments about our capacity. Your autonomy deserves protection, your choices deserve respect, and your dignity is a fundamental right that no one, not even family members who claim to love you, has the authority to take away. Truth will ultimately prevail over manipulation, authentic respect will triumph over controlling behavior, and genuine relationships will prove stronger than those built on fear and paternalism. A life of purpose and independent decision-making is always possible, no matter how vulnerable your current circumstances may seem. The human spirit possesses a remarkable capacity for resilience, and dignity can be reclaimed even after the most systematic attempts to strip it away. My story stands as proof that we are never too sick to fight for ourselves, never too vulnerable to demand respect, and never too dependent to maintain our fundamental rights as human beings. The victory may come at great cost, and the relationships may be forever changed, but the freedom and authenticity that follow make every moment of struggle worthwhile. This is what I want my legacy to represent: the unwavering belief that every person deserves to live and face illness with dignity, surrounded by genuine respect, rather than controlling manipulation, support, rather than exploitation, and hope, rather than despair. This is the profound peace that comes not from avoiding life's challenges, but from facing them with courage and emerging stronger, wiser, and more committed to justice than ever before.